Welcome to the Gospel Liberty Podcast. On this episode, I'm going to feature the rest of the interview with Steve. We get into some extremely important topics, extremely relevant for the glory of Christ, for your joy in Him, and for the advancement of the gospel. So without further ado, let's get into it. Another problem that the civil government is involved in is tariffs. So what is a tariff, and what do you think about it? And how does it really, impact our lives? We hear these words, tariff and macroeconomic debt, and is it just these boring concepts, or why should we really care about it? Let's talk about what it is first.
Starting off generally, really, a tariff is government intervention, right? Or it's the government trying to control trade, or the exchanging of goods and services. They're trying to control trade between their own country and another country, right? So that's so from a general perspective, they're controlling the trade, right? So a little more specifically, a tariff is a restriction, right? It's a restriction to trade. Controlling trade isn't they're not trying to expand it and make it more free and allowing people to do what they want, right, with what they have. So a tariff is a restriction to trade, and a tariff is really a form of price control, right? So not allowing people from different countries to do what they wish with their private property is what a tariff is trying to control, right?
So violating that principle of ownership.
Exactly.
Private ownership.
Once again, yep. Getting back to that, once again, with all of these questions, that's a really primary
key concept.
Yeah, a key concept for that, definitely. So tariffs infringe on many basic assumptions that the majority of people really agree with. If you ask people, whether or not we should have the right to own property, people will generally agree with you that yes, people should be able to have property, right, and own property. But then, when discussing whether or not America should charge a tax or a tariff on a certain product or goods coming into the country from Central America or from China or Japan or Russia, these people then, they violate what they claim to be their principles, right? So just for a couple of quick examples here, the majority of people would claim, like I said, the right to, they would claim to really support the right to own property, right? But again, in actual practice, this belief is consistently violated, right? So the free exchange of goods and services between individuals really depends on that idea that the person has the right to own the property, right? And if a person has the right to own their property, then it of course follows then that he has a right to use or to dispose of the property as he wishes, right?
Right.
And so, as we have been discussing, free market principles here, the principles that allow us to have more liberty, have freedom. We can remember that, someone who defends tariffs cannot logically oppose, government control of prices of all products and profits and, different subsidies and, many other violations of free market principles.
Right. Right, for sure. And I think that's what is so troubling today, is that a lot of folks who claim to be limited, who claim to love liberty and limited government in other areas, many folks in, say, the Republican Party today will favor tariffs, and they're really violating this principle of small government. And it's very troubling that they don't understand that the civil government doesn't have the authority to get involved the biblical authority, I'm saying, under Christ, to get involved in these things, because they're violating this principle of stealing from other people. They're taking a little bit off of the top line of a different company just because the company is in a different nation, and they're taking from that, and then that is actually causing the price of the good to increase for the people in their own country who are buying it. It's
Exactly.
it's just a different type of tax that gets passed on to the consumer, that is more indirect. But the company who is paying to import that good, and who is paying a tax, they have to charge more money for the people to the consumer who ends up buying that product ends up paying more, and then you're hurting the consumers in your own country when you do that.
You know, unless you actually think about what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
a tariff might sound like a good idea, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we want to, produce something, in
In
Maine.
America,
Yeah,
right?
we want to produce something in the state of Maine. And so that's going to be good for us. That's going to be good for America. But then when you think about, like, you know, what can be produced in a different country significantly easier than
Mm-hmm.
it can be produced in a certain state or in the country in general,
Mm-hmm.
then you can really start to understand, why, why would we want to be doing this? Just for a quick example, is just a short, quick example here. Something that may, let's say, bananas.
Mm-hmm.
Bananas generally, they don't grow significantly well in America or
Right.
in New York, for example. And
Mm-hmm.
so we may import them. But bananas grow, everywhere in Central America, the
Right.
Central American countries. So a tariff would basically say that, we think, or the government thinks that, or the U.S. government thinks that we should grow our own bananas
Mm-hmm.
in New York. But in order to grow bananas in New York, it's very expensive, right? Because you need to recreate the climate,
Right.
the
Build a
climate,
big,
just the
massive greenhouse,
yeah,
climate controlled.
yeah,
Build
exactly. In
kind of a
order
pseudo fake Central American climate.
Exactly. In order for bananas to grow, right? So we could, but then if there's a tariff on the bananas from Central America, then when people are buying their bananas at the grocery store, if they're buying New York bananas, they're going to be paying significantly more because the cost is so much more
To
to
produce one.
produce the bananas in the United States, right? So that's just a
Yeah,
simple,
yeah,
quick
just to get into more practical. Yeah,
yeah,
you had to pay the architect to build the whole, facility. You have to pay the overhead costs of keeping the climate at the certain temperature. You have to pay the watering to, give it the exact amount of water and sunlight, and it's just so much different than how God created the climate of Central America. And then you have
exactly.
people in, the state of Oklahoma who want a banana, and instead of being able to get, six of them for $1 or whatever they cost, all of a sudden it's six for $10. And they
Exactly.
say, wait a second, what's going on here? I used to be able to get my banana for six for $1. Well, it's because of this tariff, and now we had to produce it in the United States. What? I mean, now all of a sudden that's hurting my bottom line. And what we don't understand is that this actually happens.
Oh,
So
all
this
the
isn't
time.
just some
Exactly.
random thing. There's tariffs on so many different types of products. And a lot of
Exactly.
times it's not just one thing that's as simple as a banana to understand. It's some type of commodity or resource that is included in another product. So it's something that goes into a computer or a television or a car, for example. And all of a sudden, as an American consumer, you're paying much more for a worse product than you would have if the tariff didn't exist, and you could get a different product for a lot cheaper that's going to last longer, that's going to be a much better product. So it really causes a lot of problems.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's a lot more, discussion that we could have on tariffs and how it actually impacts, our everyday lives. But that, I think that was just a good example, just to show something as simple as a banana, can, if the tariffs are imposed, it truly does affect our life.
Right, right, for sure. And then, of course, one of the arguments is, well, but then, we're not going to have any jobs in America. We're not going to because, if you have that tariff and you build this, banana facility and this whole banana distribution system, then, well, you're creating a lot of jobs. But the goal of economy, of a prosperous economy under the lordship of Christ, is not merely to create a job. You want to create a prosperous system. So think of, if you wanted to build a pool, a swimming pool, and you could create a lot of jobs building a swimming pool if you just used labor, and the only tool they could use is a spoon, a fork and a spoon, and let's dig the pool with a fork and a spoon. Oh, it's going to take a lot longer, so you're going to be providing a job for a much longer period of time. Oh, and the laborers, they're going to get paid for a lot more. And oh, this is so great. Look at all these jobs that are being created because we no longer use excavators to dig swimming pools. Well, everyone would scoff and laugh at that, because why wouldn't you just use the tool and you're being more efficient so that those people who would have been digging, swimming pools with spoons and forks can now go and do something else and be more effective and efficient at any given task and provide more value to a business or start their own business. And that's exactly the principle of tariffs. That the goal isn't just to keep a certain job within a country. It is to free up your people to do something that is even more productive. And this mindset of anti-technology just to keep jobs is not biblical. The Lord wants us to cultivate, to fill the earth and subdue it, to have dominion. And part of that is developing these new technologies and allowing certain areas of the world that God has created, or certain strengths that other nations may have, and we can reap the benefit of that, of their production, and we can be freed up to do something else that we may be more skilled at as well.
Exactly. Yep.
So, what about the hiring practices of businesses? We have a lot of people, who support the civil government mandating that businesses should, not be able to refrain from hiring a certain person, based on a certain trait that the person has, or a certain personality type, or they have to, meet a certain quota or something. Should the civil government get involved in the hiring practice of businesses? What does that do to the economy? And I'll comment on this one first. I mean, no, they shouldn't. It's beyond their scope of authority under God. Anything that the civil government does to get involved in the private sector is going to result in increased cost for the consumer and less efficiency and productivity for a business. And there's a difference between a sin and a crime. We have to remember this. So a sin, if a business doesn't hire someone just because of the flavor of pizza that they like, or something dumb like that, okay, you could say, oh, this is sinful, or this is dumb, or if it's because of the color of the person's skin, or if it is because of the person's beliefs on any given issue. Well, it's possible for a business owner to be sinning against someone but not committing a crime, because once again, this principle of ownership, as long as the business is owned by the business owner, then the business owner can do with the business whatever he or she wants to do. And if he thinks that only hiring people of a certain personality type is going to be what is best for the business to run the most efficient, and to be able to produce the best products and services for at the cheapest price for the greatest number of people, then that is going to be a great thing for his business to do, and he should have the freedom to do that. So, and once again, if something's being done out of hatred or pride for a person or a group of people just because of something like their ethnicity, for example, that's evil, certainly, but it's not necessarily a crime. Because a crime is something that directly harms the life or property of another person. And no person is entitled to work a job for another company. I'm not entitled to other people's stuff. I'm not entitled to other people's organizations. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, as we've kind of been talking about, anytime the government gets involved in anything, they usually don't do it with precision, right? And they're not doing it with the right motives either. They don't understand, or it seems like they're really not understanding what their involvement is bringing, right? So in different industries, this can, people's thoughts on it are different for different industries, right? So when there is a industry like, let's say, neurosurgery, right?
Right.
So the doctor of a neurosurgeon, right? So if the government said that that a certain hospital had to hire certain people with certain traits and certain beliefs and everything, it's very clear that the best people who are the best at neurosurgery are likely not going to be hired. And some of them might be hired, right? Some of the best people might be hired, but everybody is likely not going to be hired that is the best. And when it affects everyday people, it's a lot easier to see that if you're needing a surgery, you want the best person to be doing the surgery, right?
Yeah,
and
if you
so
need brain surgery, you want to go to the one who's going to get the job done.
Exactly. You don't care about any sort of traits or anything. Like you would want them to perform the surgery the best that it can possibly be done, right? And so it's easy to see from that example, that the civil government, it would be a major problem, if they were involved. But people don't really think about that. They think of just like a I don't know, just like a random pizza restaurant or something,
Right.
Like, oh, well, the government can get involved in that because, it's, nothing against people who work at pizza places, obviously, but it's not as skilled of labor as a neurosurgeon.
Right. And in reality, it is still going to cause, problems in society, and it's not going to be most beneficial because that pizza place then is going to have people who are working there who are not as efficient and effective at the job as someone else could have been. And then the costs of production are going to increase, and those costs of production are going to get passed on to the consumer. And all of a sudden, a pizza is going to be, $35, $40 because the people working there aren't qualified for the job. So all of these things matter, and when you think about it from the perspective of the business owner and not just from the worker, because the business owner is the one who owns the business. It's his business, it's her business. It's under the lordship of Christ. It's protected by the 8th commandment, and you don't have a right to work at someone else's company. The person who developed the business, who started the business, who took on the risk to start the business, is providing a product or service and is providing jobs, and that person has the authority to do with it what he or she pleases.
Yep.
And then how about fiat currency? I think we've heard that phrase a lot more in our current society because of what's going on with a lot of economic talk. But what is fiat currency? Is it the best money? What is the best money, and why would you say? What is fiat currency?
Fiat money is government issued currency that is not backed by a commodity such as gold. Such as gold. And is it the best money? Well, in order to determine whether or not something is good money or the best money, we need to think about what money is, right? So what is money? So money, is a means of exchange for an economy, broadly speaking, right? So money needs to provide accurate and specific valuations, right, from one person to another, right? So if 3 different items would cost one silver coin, it doesn't matter how big it is or how much it is, or how much weight it is. If it costs one silver coin, then everyone knows what the market value is for the three items, right? So money, must also maintain its value over time, right? Or be a store of value, right? So if you sell a product, for 10 coins, in one December, who the person who is selling the product in December, they want those coins to, those 10 coins to be worth the same amount the following summer, right? So it needs to be a store of value. And so there's really also, there's five primary, traits that make good money, right? So I'll just breeze over these, and then we can discuss this if you agree, disagree. So money, it must be divisible, right? So we can split it up easily. It must be portable, right? So we can carry it around. It has to be durable, right? So it doesn't rot away over time. It must be recognizable, so people from all over know what it looks like. It can't be copied easily, and it must be scarce, right? So there must not be that much of it around, right? So historically, money wasn't determined by a government, right? But by the free market. The free market had its money, had the money for the market to exchange. Right. And so the last thing here, then, many people think that, gold and silver and copper were, created by God specifically with these characteristics that make them more likely to be used as money. And we have seen that historically, that those three have been widely used as money, over the years. So what is the best money, right? So looking at the qualifications, that I just listed, gold is clearly the perfect fit, and it fits those traits.
Yeah, I love that. And that's why in the Bible you see that money is always gold and silver. And if I can quote Gary North here in his book, Sovereignty and Dominion, he says, money is a commodity. It's a real thing which people value. It's the most marketable commodity. In the Bible, money is always gold and silver. Money makes exchange much easier because people can trade their goods for money and use the money to buy other things that they want. So very exactly consistent with what you're saying. And a lot of folks in our current society, they just think of money as equivalent to United States dollars. And that is exactly what the United States government has wanted you to think, has wanted people to think. It's just that this is money. We are the controllers of money. But that is very incorrect. And fiat currency is not the best money because it's entirely dependent on the civil government's declaration or decree. That's what fiat means. It's money by decree, rather than being determined by the use that comes from that given commodity or that historic value that you talked about that comes with something like gold and silver, and the historic value and the biblical value. And the best money is something that keeps the power out of the hands of the civil government and into the hands of the people. Like you mentioned, the market determines what the money should be. And this is very important for how we think about, for how we live. And you don't only think of money, I encourage our listeners, don't only think of money as United States dollars.
Exactly.
There's many other things that you can hold in your portfolio if you want to keep a store of value besides United States dollars, and educate other people on this as well. We need to all continue to think and begin to think that money is not just United States dollars. It is exactly everything that you talked about. What do you say? There's a current mindset that says that prophets are selfish and greedy. What do you say to people who say that prophets are selfish and greedy?
Profits are what is really left over after a company or business owner takes into account all of his costs to create his product and to transport it or to bring it to market to sell to the consumer, right? So if the products sell for more than all of the costs combined, then
Mm-hmm.
there is a profit. So that is what the profit is. A profit is what is left over after all of the costs,
Mm-hmm.
right? So remembering our comments on the right to own property and to trade it freely, if there is a free exchange of money, for example, for a product that nobody was forcing the consumer to buy.
Right. A
You know,
voluntary exchange. Yep.
exactly. Yep. Yep. Then the profits are the necessary result of the exchange, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
there was no profit and the business owners were working tirelessly to create the product, but if they were losing money, then they would obviously stop making
They lose their
the
incentive.
product. That's exactly right. And then the consumers are the ones now hurt because the product that they want no longer exists. So
Exactly.
usually the person who is saying that, oh, profits are selfish and profits are greasy are greedy, they're usually talking about somebody else's profits, right?
Mm.
They're not talking about their own money that they are making as they are working their job, right? So the blue collar worker, or even the right white collar worker, they never really seem to have a profit that is too high, right? It's just the other guy who has the profit that's too high, that they read about, in the on the new, in the news, and they're out, they're the big business owners, or they're out on Wall Street,
Right.
but thankfully, God reminds us in His law, to not covet, right? The 10th
Yes.
commandment.
Exactly. That's such a great point. I love how you personalize it, individualize it, because what we do is we sell when we work a job, we're selling our labor, and then we are receiving something else for that, and we are profiting as well. So if other people's profits are evil but ours aren't, then that's called hypocrisy. And like you
Exactly.
said, this a voluntary exchange of goods is beneficial for both parties. Otherwise, both parties wouldn't be participating in it. That is the bottom line. And when I first understood that, it just completely transformed my understanding of economics and of profits, that this is a free exchange. No one is making you go and buy this car, for example. You don't have a gun to your head and, oh, I need to buy this computer, I need to buy this car, whatever. You're voluntarily
Yeah.
doing it. And if you are buying it, then you are benefiting from it. And the seller is benefiting from it because he or she makes a profit. So where those two things meet, where a private party buys something and a private seller sells something, and they come to an agreement voluntarily, both are benefiting. And if you take away the profit, the profit is what rewards investors, for example, who took a risk to invest in the business with their time, with their effort, with their money. The profit rewards the risk of the business owner, of the producer, who was risking something by getting into the business and providing this good or service at a price that is voluntarily purchased by the consumer.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So many people think that like, oh, the exchange has to be an even exchange, but there's really, like you said, I mean, there's not really an even exchange. There's every exchange, if it's voluntary, both people are winning. They're coming
Yes.
out ahead. Both people are coming out ahead. And
Hmm.
if you're buying a car, you would rather have the car than the money,
Right.
right? And then the person who's selling the car would rather have the money than the car. So you're
Yes.
both getting what you value more than what you're giving up.
Yep. And even if your car breaks down and you're in the middle of the wilderness, and oh, my tire popped, and you have to go to some random tire shop, and oh, you have a tire, and the guy charges you 10 times what the price would be at your local tire store, and then you buy it, and oh, you're so upset. How could that guy, he is he's charging way too high of a price. This is horrible. I can't believe that. Well, if you wouldn't benefit from buying the tire, then you don't have to buy it. But then what are you going to do? You're going to have to walk the rest of the way because your car is broken down. So even though you're upset that you paid such a high price, you wouldn't have bought the tire unless you saw it as a greater benefit to you than not buying the tire. So even in that situation, it's still a benefit to you. And that's how we need to think about it, is I'm being benefited by this. Otherwise, I shouldn't be purchasing it.
Yep.
What about inflation? There's a lot of talk about inflation today. What is inflation?
Many people think that, inflation is price increases, right? But inflation is actually the increase of the money supply, right? Or we're inflating the money supply, which does eventually lead to an increase in prices, right? But the actual inflation is the increasing of the money supply. So I mean, who creates inflation, right? So in the U.S. at least, the Federal Reserve, working together with other banks, they inflate the U.S. money supply.
Right, exactly, and it's really theft. It's taking the value from those who have saved by watering down what's already there. And God actually pronounces a judgment on this in Isaiah 121. He says, "Your silver has become dross, your best wine mixed with water." And Gary DeMar, in his great book, God and Government, he uses this example of debasing wine by mixing it with 10% water, but then selling it as pure wine. And that's an unjust balance. It's ultimately theft. So like a silver merchant would, in his sin and in criminality, he would add tin to silver, and then they could reap a profit off of it by devaluing the currency and pretending that it's pure silver when really it has 10% tin in it. And if you tamper with the currency enough through inflation, then you're debasing the currency, and that's providing an unjust measure. It's taking from other people. Proverbs 16:11 says, a just balance and scales belong to the Lord. All the weights of the bag are his concern. So, and that's actually what, causes prices to rise. So the law of supply and demand is how God ordered the universe and how he governs it. So if supply decreases, if supply of something decreases and then demand is the same, then prices are going to rise. And similarly, if supply stays the same and demand increases, then prices are going to rise. So take cars, for example. Imagine there's only 1,000 cars available in the United States for purchase right now. Well, the prices are going to go wildly high because there's so much competition for that limited number of cars. But now imagine there's 100 million cars available. Well, prices are going to have to drop because these car companies have too much inventory. And one way that the supply decreases or demand increases for a good or a service is when there is an increase in the money supply. So think about it. If there's more dollars in circulation, then that means people can buy more things, which then drives the supply down. There's less goods, and then the prices go up. And also what printing money does is devalue the currency. So imagine you found an extremely rare coin from the Roman Empire era in Italy, and it's only one of 3 in the world. But then one day someone's digging, they're building a new building somewhere in Italy, and 1 million more of these coins are dug up in a field. Well, your product is devalued because there's so many more in existence. And this is what happens with the US dollar. So then you have to charge more US dollars. Businesses have to charge more US dollars to equal the value of the product or service because there's so many more dollars in circulation for the same number of goods or a less number of goods. Right? So that's why prices rise.
Exactly
Would you
right.
agree?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right. And so, a question that some people might be having is, does this actually happen, or how can we see this happen, or have we seen it happen? And we've seen it happen so many times. Just as a couple statistics here, during World War I, the United States was on a gold standard, right? So this meant that $1 was valued at 1/20th an ounce of gold, or $20 for 1 ounce, right? So in 1916, if you had $20, you could go to the bank and redeem it for 1 ounce gold coin, right? So in between 1916 and 1920, the supply of money in the United States, so this is what you were saying, that the supply of the money, it went from $20 billion to $35 billion. So a 70% increase in just 5 years, right? So did that mean that, 750 million ounces of gold were found and
Yeah.
introduced into the economy? No, right? No, so it just meant that the government started printing more paper, right? And banks started just adjusting the digits in their on their ledgers, right? So
Right.
then what happened with that? So as you mentioned, with the law and supply and with supply and demand, prices started increasing, right? So if you bought a gallon of milk in 1916, you were paying somewhere around 31 cents or so, and just a few years later, in 1920, for that same gallon of milk, it was just it would cost 57 cents, right? So that's a significant increase, and like you said, inflation, it's the hidden tax, right? So unfortunately, it didn't really stop at all in 1920, right? So since 1914, every dollar in the United States has lost 97% of its value. So
That's
in other
shocking.
words, yeah, I mean, in other words, something that cost $30 in 1914 now would cost about $1,000. So that $970 of value, it didn't just disappear into thin air, right? It didn't just go away, right? The government and the banking system, they took it from everyone who owned dollars
Yes.
during that period. So there's really real impacts when money is printed, and just from a day-to-day perspective, it may be difficult to see. But even now, heading out to the stores to buy groceries, that you can really tell that prices have been increasing.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a death by a thousand cuts type of thing where, if
Exactly.
if for anyone else who has children, if you look at your child on a day-to-day basis, you can't tell that he or she is growing. But then all of a
Exactly.
sudden, if you measure it, on an annual basis or 5 years, wow, look at, now all of a sudden he's a foot taller, 2 feet taller, whatever. It's very similar to inflation of the money supply and then the price increases that go up because of it. Because it might happen more slowly, a lot of times we're duped into thinking that it's not really causing that big of problems. But like you said, it is stealing money from savers. So if imagine
Exactly.
a person had saved $30 in the bank account in 1914, and oh yeah, let's save a lot of money. Let's keep it in that account. And now it's 30 years later, and his $30 can hardly buy anything
Exactly.
because of how the civil government has devalued the currency, and now the purchasing power of those $30 is so much less. And this encourages borrowing, it encourages being a debtor, and it discourages saving. And this is one of the reasons why so many folks live paycheck to paycheck, because the incentive to save is so much lower when this rapid inflation is taking place, when the civil government's just continuing to print money. And we, as people who care about God's glory, Christ's glory, limited civil government, should not be okay with something like the Federal Reserve Bank. It is a great
Exactly.
evil in society to have this institution that can manipulate interest rates, change interest rates, that can introduce new currency into the system. And it's just been accepted for over 100 years. And so often, even political conservatives who profess to be political conservatives just assume that the Federal Reserve Bank is needed or good. But really what it's doing is just prolonging, it's making the problems that we will eventually face in this nation if we don't change course, it's making them 1,000 times worse than if we were to rip the Band-Aid off right now and allow the Lord to heal our economy properly. We would have an opportunity to have much more long-term prosperity.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So what do you think then? What do you predict is going to happen to the United States dollar?
Yeah, great question. I think, if you devalue a currency too much, then the people begin to lose confidence in that currency. They store their value in other currencies or in other hard assets. And then maybe even businesses will stop accepting that currency. In other nations, stop treating it as the most stable currency. And then it could even completely collapse or go into hyperinflation, or it could lose so much value that prices of foreign goods increase so much. And really it could lead to the collapse of the entire economy. And that's not just some, fear-mongering extreme thing. If you have any knowledge of world history, you know that problems with currencies and economic problems have brought down empires in the past. And just to assume that things will always be like the past, that the Federal Reserve Bank and the United States monetary policy can continue to go on as the same and will continue to have this great economy like so many people falsely think that we currently have right now. That is just this normalcy bias that you think the future is always going to be exactly like the past and nothing bad is ever going to happen. We need to really be returning to what Christ says in his word about all these things that we talked about. Otherwise, we're going to have a great problem with the U.S. dollar. Would you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Understanding this topic of economics, hopefully through this discussion, we've said some practical things that people can at least think about and hopefully study more, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, because a lot of folks think, well, what am I going to do about this? I'm not a politician. I am not the president of the United States, and we have a republic. Our civil government in the United States is a republic, and we should really care about our local government even more than we care about our national government. Yes. And care about the people around you and influencing the community that you are involved in, whether it's your church or your family or other organizations, associations you're involved in, your neighbors. Have these kind of conversations, because these types of changes happen first from regeneration is the best thing, when someone trusts in Christ and then begins to have his or her mind change to want to submit to Scripture in all areas of life. And then as individual people bow the knee joyfully to Jesus and are transformed and justified by faith alone, then this is how societies change, one by one, little by little, grassroots. I mean, think of where we were when Christ was ascended, the small number of people who were Christians, how few people had this liberty mindset, and now where we are. And there's many people who think like this and want to understand more of what the Scriptures teach on this issue. So let's all seek to continue to have these discussions and do what we can and demand that our politicians and local representatives and national representatives actually understand these things, that we don't have pseudo or kind of fake conservatives, fake limited government people who are kind of posing as limited government in other ways, but who really are, a big civil government folks who don't understand this principle of private property, private ownership, and the Eighth Commandment and how it applies to civil governments. Thank you so much for joining, Steve. It's a joy to have you. We hope to have you on again to talk about some other issues and some similar issues. It's a privilege.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Love the discussion.
And with that, we'll close this episode of the Gospel Liberty Podcast.